HOA rules are supposed to keep neighborhoods looking nice, but when Karen decided my fence was a violation, she wasn't expecting me to turn the tables on her. I built my fence to HOA guidelines, but that didn't stop Karen, the HOA president, from fining me repeatedly because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. She demanded I tear it down and replace it with a more appropriate design, which conveniently looked exactly like her own fence. But instead of backing down, I dug through the HOA rulebook and found a loophole she never saw coming. Stick around to find out what the loophole was. If you enjoy stories about Karens, please like this video, and also remember to subscribe for more videos like these in the future. Moving into Willow Creek Estates was supposed to be a fresh start for me and my wife Jenna. We had finally found our dream home, a cozy 2-story house with a huge backyard for our dogs. The only downside, the neighborhood had an HOA. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. The rules were mostly reasonable. No unkempt lawns, no junk cars, no extreme paint colors. Fair enough. But then I met Karen. Karen wasn't just an HOA president. She was a full-blown dictator. She lived right next door, which meant she had a front-row seat to everything I did. The first warning sign came a week after moving in. Jenna and I had just finished putting up a beautiful wooden fence around our backyard. It was the same height and style as other fences in the neighborhood, and we had even checked the HOA rules before installing it. But the morning after the fence was finished, I found a letter taped to our front door. Notice of violation. Your recently installed fence is not in compliance with community aesthetics. Please submit an application for approval, or you will be required to remove and replace it within 30 days. I blinked. We had already followed the HOA guidelines. Why would I need to reapply for something that was already allowed? I looked over at Karen's house, and there she was, standing on her porch, arms crossed, watching me. Jenna came outside and saw the letter. "Are you kidding me?" she groaned. "I'm going to talk to her," I said, stuffing the letter into my pocket. I walked across the lawn and waved. "Morning, Karen. Got your letter." She smiled, the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. "I was just about to stop by," she said sweetly. "Your fence, it doesn't match the preferred neighborhood aesthetic." I frowned. "Karen, I checked the rules. It's the same as at least 4 other houses." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, those were grandfathered in. New fences need to be approved by the A." I raised an eyebrow. "Where does it say that in the bylaws?" Her smile tightened. "It's an unwritten guideline." There it was. Karen had no actual authority to demand I change my fence. She just didn't like it. I forced a polite smile. "Well, I'll be keeping my fence." Her eyes narrowed. "Then you'll be receiving daily fines until it's corrected." I clenched my jaw. "I guess I'll see you at the next HOA meeting, then." Her smile vanished. She had expected me to roll over and comply. But instead, I was about to make her life very difficult. And she had no idea what was coming. I wasn't about to let Karen bully me over a fence. If she thought a few violation letters would scare me, she was in for a surprise. I went inside, grabbed the HOA rulebook, and sat down at the kitchen table with Jenna. "There's no way she can actually enforce this," Jenna said, flipping through the pages. "She can't," I muttered, scanning the document. But that's never stopped her before. Karen's tactic was simple. She made up rules and hoped people wouldn't fight back. Most residents just paid the fines or gave in because they didn't want the headache of arguing with the HOA. But I wasn't like most people. And then I found it. In the middle of the bylaws, tucked between sections on trash can placement and mailbox maintenance, was a line about fence height regulations. All backyard fences must be between 4 and 6 feet in height. I smirked. "Jenna," I said slowly, "do you remember how tall our fence is?" She blinked, then grinned. 5 feet. Karen wanted to make my life miserable because my fence wasn't aesthetic. But legally, I had 1 more foot of wiggle room. I was about to play her game and win. The next morning, I called up the contractor who built my fence. "How fast can you add another foot to my fence?" I asked. He laughed. "You want it taller." "Yep. By HOA rules, you're allowed up to 6 feet," he said. "So yeah, we can do that. Shouldn't take more than a day." "Perfect," I said. That afternoon, my fence went from a standard backyard enclosure to a 6-foot privacy wall. Karen was watching the whole time from her window. By the time the contractor packed up his tools, she was already marching across the lawn. "This is unacceptable," she snapped, waving a piece of paper in my face. I leaned against the fence and crossed my arms. "Something wrong, Karen. You are violating the HOA's standards." "No, I'm not." I held up my phone, already open to the HOA bylaws. She froze. I scrolled to the section on fences. "You said my 5-foot fence wasn't aesthetically pleasing." "Well, according to your own rules, I can go up to 6 feet. So, problem solved." Karen's face twitched. This isn't what I meant." "Oh, I know," I said, grinning. "You wanted me to take the fence down. But now, instead of a 5-foot fence, you have a 6-foot wall to stare at every day." She looked like she was about to explode. Then she did something I wasn't expecting. She pulled out a brand new violation notice. "I'm issuing an emergency citation for constructing a fence without HOA approval," she declared. I nearly laughed. "Karen, my fence was already approved. All I did was add an extra foot. Totally legal." She clenched her teeth. "Then I'll take this to the board." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the same board that's tired of you making up rules?" That actually shut her up. She stood there, fuming, then turned on her heel and stormed off. But I knew Karen wasn't done, because that night she tried something even pettier. At around 11 p.m., Jenna nudged me awake. "Babe," she whispered, "there's someone outside." I sat up. "What?" She grabbed her phone. Motion sensor just went off by the fence. I grabbed my own phone and pulled up the security camera feed. And there she was, Karen, in my yard, holding a tape measure. My blood boiled. I threw on a hoodie and stormed outside. Karen was so focused on measuring the fence that she didn't even notice me at first. "What the hell are you doing?" I said. She jumped and spun around, eyes wide. "I was verifying a violation," she snapped. I stared at her. "At 11 p.m. She huffed. "I have a right to inspect HOA violations at any time." I pointed at my security camera, blinking red above us. "Congratulations, Karen. You just trespassed on my property. On camera." She froze. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of her standing by the fence with a tape measure. "I'm filing a police report for trespassing," I said calmly. "Unless you want to explain to an officer why you're sneaking around people's yards at night." Karen's mouth opened and closed, but she had nothing to say. Without another word, she stormed back to her house. And that's when I knew I had her right where I wanted her. The next morning, I wasted no time. I printed out the security footage stills of Karen trespassing in my yard and went straight to the police station. I didn't even have to explain much. The officer at the front desk took one look at the photo of Karen sneaking around my fence with a tape measure inside. "Let me guess," he said, rubbing his temples. "HOA problems." I chuckled. "Yeah, big time." He took my statement and logged the incident. "Since this is her first recorded offense, we'll issue a formal warning. If she comes onto your property again, she could face criminal trespassing charges." Perfect. By the time I got back home, the entire neighborhood was talking about it. Mark, my next-door neighbor, was waiting for me on my driveway. "Dude," he said, shaking his head, "did Karen really get caught sneaking into your yard?" "Oh yeah," I said, grinning. "And now she's got an official warning from the police." Mark burst out laughing. "She's gonna lose her mind." He wasn't wrong. Because later that afternoon, Karen went full meltdown mode. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying an iced coffee, when Karen marched across my lawn like an angry drill sergeant. Her face was red, her fists clenched, and she had yet another violation notice in her hand. "You are the most uncooperative resident I have ever dealt with," she seethed. I smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." "You had the audacity to report me to the police," she snapped. I leaned back in my chair. "Well, yeah. You trespassed on my property." She held up the violation notice like it was a golden ticket to victory. "You are now being fined $1,000 for disrespecting an HOA board member." I blinked. Then I laughed. "Karen," I said slowly, "there is no rule about respecting board members." She gritted her teeth. "As president, I have the right to enforce." "You're not the president." That shut her up. She paled. "What?" I grinned. "I talked to Greg earlier. The HOA board had an emergency meeting this morning. They voted, and congratulations, you've been removed as HOA president. Karen's face drained of color. That's impossible. I shrugged. Apparently, they're sick of your nonsense. And once they saw the trespassing report, they decided you were a legal liability. She stood there shaking. This is illegal. I will sue all of you. Mark, who had overheard the conversation, stepped up beside me. Good luck with that, Karen. With your legal track record. Karen stared at both of us, completely speechless. Then, with a furious screech, she crumpled up the violation notice, threw it on my lawn, and stormed back to her house. The second her front door slammed shut, I turned to Mark. That felt amazing. He laughed. Dude, you just speed ran a revenge. I smirked. Oh, I'm not done yet. Because Karen was about to learn one last lesson. If she thought my fence upgrade was bad, she was going to hate what I did next. Karen had finally lost her position as HOA president, but I knew she wasn't going to go quietly. She had spent years running the neighborhood like a dictatorship, and now that the power was gone, she was going to do everything in her power to get revenge. I wasn't going to let that happen. So I decided to beat her at her own game one final time. That night, I sat down with a beer and the HOA bylaws. And that's when I found the perfect way to finish her off for good. The next morning, I walked over to the HOA office, where Greg, the new HOA president, was sorting through paperwork. Got a minute? I asked. He sighed. If this is about Karen, we're already working on. Oh, I know, I said, grinning. But I have a way to make sure she never tries this again. I handed him a printed-out proposal. His eyes widened as he read it. Then he looked up at me. You're a genius. That evening, the HOA board held a special meeting. Karen, still fuming from losing her position, showed up, probably thinking she could argue her way back into power. She sat near the back, arms crossed, glaring at everyone. Greg stood up. We have one final issue to vote on tonight, he said. A new amendment to the HOA bylaws. Karen perked up. New amendment? Greg nodded. We're proposing a new rule that states any HOA board member found guilty of legal violations, including trespassing or harassment of homeowners, is permanently banned from serving on the board. Karen's face fell. And Greg continued, since we have a recent case of this happening, this rule would take effect immediately. Karen shot out of her seat. You can't do this. Greg shrugged. We only need a simple majority vote. Karen whipped around, looking at the board members, the same people she had bossed around for years. Vote against this, she snapped. Nobody moved. Greg smiled. All in favor. Every single hand went up. Karen gasped. You traitors. The motion passed. Karen was now permanently banned from ever serving on the HOA board again. I couldn't help myself. I leaned over and whispered, Guess you'll have to find a new hobby. She turned redder than a stop sign. Then, without another word, she stormed out of the meeting. And that was the last time Karen ever tried to enforce her ridiculous rules. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood changed. Without Karen's constant interference, people started relaxing. The HOA board focused on actual community improvements, not just petty fines and power trips. And Karen, she sold her house and left the neighborhood. Rumor had it she tried to join the HOA in a different neighborhood, but once they found out about her history, they shut her down immediately. As for me, my 6-foot fence stood tall, untouched. And every time I looked at it, I smiled, knowing Karen was probably somewhere, still furious about it. That's how I turned the tables on my HOA president and got her kicked out for good. What do you think? Did Karen get what she deserved? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever had a crazy HOA experience, I want to hear it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more insane HOA horror stories.